Have you ever wondered why every revolution that promised freedom ended in tyranny? Why every company that disrupted an industry eventually became the monster it once fought against? Why every leader who screamed for change became the very obstacle to progress they once despised? This video will fundamentally alter how you understand power, control, and the dangerous game of transformation. Because what I'm about to reveal isn't just another self-help principle. It's the hidden architecture of how empires rise, how revolutions fail, and how the powerful stay powerful while appearing to champion change. The 45th law of power states, preach the need for change, but never reform too much at once. And this law contains a truth so uncomfortable, so contrary to everything we've been taught about progress and leadership, that most people will reject it immediately. But those who understand it will see the invisible strings that control society, business, and human behavior itself. Let me take you on a journey through human psychology, historical catastrophes, and modern manipulation. By the end, you'll never see a political campaign, a corporate rebranding, or a social movement the same way again. Here's the twisted truth about human nature that nobody wants to admit: people desperately want change, but they're terrified of it. We are creatures of contradiction, walking paradoxes wrapped in flesh. We complain endlessly about our circumstances, we dream of revolution, we fantasize about burning down the old systems and building something new. But the moment real change arrives at our doorstep, we panic. We retreat. We suddenly discover that the old ways weren't so bad after all. This isn't weakness. This isn't stupidity. This is evolution. For 300,000 years, our ancestors survived by developing an extraordinary sensitivity to their environment. Imagine being a human 50,000 years ago. Every tree, every rock, every path through the forest was memorized. Your survival depended on knowing your territory with absolute precision. When something changed, when a familiar landmark disappeared or a new predator's tracks appeared, your brain released stress hormones. Cortisol flooded your system. Your heart rate increased. Because change meant danger. Change meant the possibility of death. Now here's where it gets fascinating: that ancient alarm system still operates in your brain today. When your company announces a reorganization, when your government proposes new laws, when someone suggests changing how you've always done things, that same primitive fear response activates. You might not consciously recognize it as fear. You might intellectualize it as skepticism or caution or reasonable concern. But deep in your neural architecture, in the parts of your brain that predate language itself, you're experiencing the same terror your ancestors felt when the familiar became unfamiliar. But here's the contradiction, the beautiful paradox that creates the opportunity for manipulation: humans also despise stagnation. We're innovation engines. We're the species that looked at the sky and built machines to fly. We looked at disease and invented medicine. We're hardwired for progress, for improvement, for the new and novel. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter of motivation and reward, surges when we encounter something new and potentially beneficial. So we exist in this perpetual tension between two opposing forces: the conservative force that says keep everything the same because the familiar is safe, and the progressive force that says change everything because stagnation is death. Every human being, every society, every organization lives on this knife's edge between preservation and transformation. And this is where power enters the equation. The true master of power understands this paradox and exploits it with surgical precision. They become the voice of change while actually being the guardian of stability. They preach revolution while ensuring that nothing truly revolutionary ever occurs. They are the magician who makes you believe you're seeing transformation while the fundamental structure remains untouched. Think about it this way: imagine a pressure cooker. As heat increases, pressure builds. If that pressure has no release valve, eventually the entire system explodes catastrophically. But if you create a small, controlled release, the pressure dissipates gradually, and the container remains intact. Human societies operate exactly like this pressure cooker. Frustration builds. Inequality grows. Resentment accumulates. And at some point, if nothing releases that pressure, revolution becomes inevitable. Not the controlled, managed kind of revolution. The violent, chaotic, system-destroying kind. The kind where heads roll, literally or figuratively. The kind where the powerful lose everything. So what does the intelligent wielder of power do? They become the release valve. They orchestrate change, but only enough change to release the pressure without destroying the container. They give people the feeling of progress without actual transformation. They rearrange the furniture while keeping the foundation exactly as it was. This isn't just theory. This is documented historical pattern repeated across centuries and continents. Let's travel back to ancient Rome, to the period when the Republic was dying and the Empire was being born. The average Roman citizen was poor, powerless, and increasingly resentful. A tiny aristocratic elite controlled vast wealth while the masses struggled. The traditional Roman virtues of the Republic, of citizen participation and shared sacrifice, had been hollowed out by corruption and greed. This was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Enter Augustus Caesar, one of history's most brilliant manipulators of power. Augustus understood Law 45 better than perhaps anyone before or since. He didn't seize power through obvious tyranny. He didn't declare himself dictator and dare people to challenge him. Instead, he performed the most elegant political theater in human history. Augustus publicly proclaimed his devotion to the Republic. He gave speeches about restoring traditional Roman values. He rejected the title of king or dictator. He called himself merely princeps, first citizen among equals. He made a grand show of returning power to the Senate, of respecting republican institutions, of honoring the old ways. And the Roman people loved him for it. They felt like their voices mattered again. They felt like the Republic had been restored. They felt like change had come. But here's what actually happened: Augustus had concentrated more power in his own hands than any Roman in history. He controlled the military absolutely. He held multiple offices simultaneously. He appointed every important position. The Senate became a theatrical prop, giving the appearance of authority while possessing none. The Republic was dead, but Augustus had so skillfully managed the transition that most Romans didn't even notice they were now living under an emperor. He preached the need for change, for restoring old virtues, for returning power to the people. But he never actually reformed the fundamental power structure. Instead, he made it more absolute while making it appear more democratic. And for the average Roman, life actually did improve in tangible ways. Augustus invested in infrastructure. He expanded the bread doles. He built theaters and forums. He created the appearance of prosperity and participation. The masses got enough real benefit that they didn't notice they'd traded their freedom for security and entertainment, bread and circuses, the Romans called it. Give people food and entertainment, and they won't notice they've lost their power. This pattern would repeat throughout history, but Augustus perfected the formula, appeared to champion change while actually consolidating control. Now let's examine what happens when someone violates Law 45. When change comes too fast, too radical, too complete. The French Revolution began with the noblest intentions. Liberty, equality, fraternity. The end of aristocratic privilege. The dawn of democracy and human rights. The revolutionaries wanted to tear down every institution of the old regime and build a new society based on reason and justice. And they did tear it down. Completely. Ruthlessly. They didn't just reform the monarchy, they executed the king. They didn't just reduce the power of the Catholic Church, they attempted to eradicate Christianity entirely and replace it with a cult of reason. They didn't just modify the calendar, they created an entirely new one, renaming months and even redefining the week. They changed everything, all at once, with revolutionary fervor. What happened? Within 5 years, France descended into the Terror, where the revolution began devouring its own children. Robespierre, one of the revolution's architects, was himself executed by the very system he created. The Committee of Public Safety became a murder machine, executing thousands upon thousands of French citizens for insufficient revolutionary enthusiasm. The attempt to destroy all old forms and create entirely new ones produced not utopia but chaos, paranoia, and mass death. And then, inevitably, the pendulum swung back. The French people, exhausted by constant upheaval and terror, desperate for stability and order, welcomed Napoleon Bonaparte. They traded their revolution for an emperor. Within 15 years of executing their king for tyranny, they were cheering for a new tyrant who would eventually crown himself emperor and drag Europe into decades of war. This is the price of violating Law 45. When you change too much too fast, when you uproot everything familiar all at once, you create such psychological and social chaos that people will embrace almost anything that promises stability. They'll accept tyranny over chaos. They'll surrender freedom for order. The revolutionaries wanted to transform France overnight. They succeeded in creating transformation, but not the kind they imagined. They proved that radical change, no matter how well-intentioned, creates a vacuum that often gets filled by something worse than what came before. Now let's understand why gradual change works where radical change fails. Your brain is not a computer that can simply update its operating system all at once. It's more like an ancient ship that needs to be rebuilt while still sailing. You have to replace one plank at a time while keeping the vessel afloat. Neuroscience has revealed something fascinating about how we process change. When you encounter something that contradicts your existing mental models, your brain doesn't simply update the model. First, it experiences stress. The anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors for conflicts and errors, activates. This creates an uncomfortable feeling, a cognitive dissonance between what you believed and what you're now encountering. Your brain then has two options: either integrate the new information, which requires significant mental energy and the painful process of admitting previous beliefs were wrong, or reject the new information and maintain existing beliefs, which is much easier and more comfortable. Most brains choose comfort. This is called confirmation bias, and it's one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. But here's the key insight: if the change is gradual enough, if it comes in small enough increments, your brain can integrate it without triggering the full stress response. Each small change seems manageable, reasonable, not too threatening. You adjust your mental models slightly, bit by bit, and before you realize it, you've accepted a completely transformed reality that you would have violently rejected if presented all at once. This is why successful wielders of power never announce their full agenda. They implement it piece by piece, each step appearing modest and reasonable, until they've achieved total transformation without ever triggering mass resistance. Think of it like boiling a frog. Put a frog in boiling water, and it jumps out immediately. Put it in cool water and gradually increase the temperature, and it stays until it's cooked. The story isn't scientifically accurate about actual frogs, but it's perfectly accurate about humans. Let's see this principle in action in the modern corporate world. In 2007, a company launched a product that would revolutionize how humans interact with technology. The iPhone wasn't just a phone. It was a handheld computer, a camera, a music player, a GPS device, a communication hub. It would eventually replace dozens of other devices and change human behavior so fundamentally that within 15 years, people would feel naked without it. But here's what Steve Jobs understood about Law 45. He didn't present the iPhone as a revolution. In his famous launch presentation, he built up to it gradually. First, he said Apple was launching 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. He repeated this 3 times, building anticipation. Then he revealed the twist: these weren't 3 separate devices, they were one device called the iPhone. Notice the rhetorical strategy. He anchored people to familiar concepts: iPod, phone, internet device. All of these were things people already understood and accepted. Then he combined them in a new way. The revolutionary became an evolution of the familiar. And even then, the first iPhone was deliberately limited. No App Store. No copy and paste. No 3G. Apple could have launched with all these features, but Jobs understood that too much change at once overwhelms people. Instead, each subsequent iPhone release added new capabilities gradually. Each year, people adjusted to slightly expanded functionality. By the time we reached the iPhone of today, with capabilities that would have seemed like science fiction in 2007, people had been gradually acclimated to each step. This is mastery of Law 45. Apple revolutionized human behavior and created the smartphone era, but they did it so gradually, with such careful management of how they presented each change, that it felt natural rather than threatening. Compare this to companies that tried to force radical change too quickly. Google Glass tried to put computers on people's faces in 2013. The technology was impressive, but it was too much, too fast, too strange. People weren't ready. The social conventions around wearing computers on your face hadn't been gradually established. Google was trying to skip 10 steps of gradual change and jump straight to the future. It failed spectacularly. The lesson: even if you have the technology, even if you have the vision, even if you're objectively correct about where things are heading, you cannot force change faster than people can psychologically absorb it. Now let's examine the dark side of this law, because Law 45 isn't just used by visionaries and product designers. It's the primary tool of authoritarians who want to dismantle democracy while appearing to strengthen it. Consider how modern authoritarian leaders consolidate power. They don't storm the Capitol with tanks and declare martial law. That's 20th century dictatorship, crude and obsolete. 21st century authoritarianism is far more sophisticated. The modern authoritarian is elected democratically. They run on a platform of fighting corruption, of returning power to the people, of making the country great again. They position themselves as the voice of the frustrated masses, the champion of change against the corrupt establishment. Sound familiar? It should. This is the playbook being executed in multiple countries right now. Once in power, they begin the gradual dismantling of democratic institutions. But they never announce this as their goal. Instead, each step is presented as a necessary reform, or reasonable response to a genuine problem. First, they target the media. Not by directly censoring it, that would be too obvious. Instead, they pass laws requiring media outlets to register as foreign agents if they receive any international funding. They impose heavy fines for spreading fake news, with the government determining what counts as fake. They have their allies buy up media companies. Each step, individually, seems justifiable. Together, they create a media environment where criticism becomes dangerous. Then they target the judiciary. They don't abolish courts or declare themselves above the law. Instead, they reform the court system for efficiency. They lower the retirement age for judges, forcing out those appointed by previous governments. They expand the number of judges and pack the courts with loyalists. They create new disciplinary procedures for judges who make inconvenient rulings. Again, each step appears reasonable in isolation. Next comes civil society. They don't ban opposition parties or NGOs outright. They just require more rigorous registration procedures. They audit organizations for financial irregularities. They pass laws restricting foreign funding for domestic groups. They create bureaucratic obstacles that make it nearly impossible for critical organizations to operate. And here's the brilliance: at each step, they can point to genuine problems that justify their actions. There is foreign interference in media. There are inefficiencies in the court system. Some NGOs do receive foreign funding that might create conflicts of interest. The authoritarian takes real issues and uses them as cover for consolidating power. This is Law 45 at its most sinister. They preach the need for change, for reform, for cleaning up corruption. And they do reform things, constantly, creating the appearance of dynamic leadership addressing real problems. But the net effect of all these reforms is the gradual construction of an authoritarian state where power flows to one person or one party, where opposition becomes impossible, where democracy exists in form but not in substance. By the time citizens realize what's happened, it's too late. Each small step seemed reasonable. Nobody could point to a single moment when democracy ended because it didn't end in a moment. It was eroded gradually, systematically, with each erosion justified as necessary reform. This is why Law 45 is so dangerous. In the wrong hands, it becomes the blueprint for destroying everything you claim to protect while appearing to be its champion. Let's go deeper into why this law operates at such a fundamental level. Human beings are not individuals in the way we typically imagine. We're colonies. Our bodies contain more bacterial cells than human cells. Our brains developed in layers over millions of years, with new structures built on top of older ones. We carry our evolutionary history in our neural architecture, from the reptilian brainstem that regulates basic survival functions, through the mammalian limbic system that processes emotions, to the relatively recent prefrontal cortex that enables abstract reasoning. These different layers don't always communicate smoothly. Often, they're in conflict. Your rational mind might understand that a spider can't hurt you, but your amygdala, your fear center, triggers a panic response anyway. You know the old ways are inefficient, but your basal ganglia, which stores habits and routines, resists changing them. When someone proposes rapid, comprehensive change, they're essentially asking all these different neural systems to reorganize simultaneously. It's possible, but it requires enormous energy and creates significant stress. It's like asking someone to rewrite their entire operating system while still using the computer for crucial tasks. But gradual change allows each neural system to adapt at its own pace. Your rational mind accepts the logic of the change. Then, slowly, your emotional systems adjust to the new normal. Finally, even your habit systems rewire themselves. The change becomes integrated at every level. This is why lasting change, whether in individuals or societies, almost never happens quickly. Real transformation requires time for biological systems to reorganize themselves. The master of power understands this biological reality and works with it rather than against it. They introduce change at the pace of neural adaptation, not at the pace of intellectual acceptance. Let's examine how this principle operates in the technology sector, because this is where we can see Law 45 playing out in real time, shaping the future of human civilization. Every major tech company claims to be revolutionary, disruptive, changing the world. And in some ways, they are. But notice how they actually implement that change. Take Facebook, now Meta. Mark Zuckerberg didn't start by saying he wanted to monetize human attention, create filter bubbles, and fundamentally alter how information spreads through society. He started with a simple premise: connect with your college friends. Completely benign. Actually useful. Then gradually, very gradually, the platform expanded. First to other colleges. Then to high schools. Then to everyone. Each expansion seemed logical, each attracted more users. Then came the news feed, which shifted Facebook from a directory to an algorithmic content stream. Then the like button, which created quantified social validation. Then third-party apps that could access your data. Then advertising targeted using that data. Then algorithmic curation of what you see. Then promotion of content that generates engagement, which turned out to mean content that provokes emotional reactions, particularly anger and fear. Each change was incremental. Each made sense from a business perspective. But together, over 15 years, they transformed Facebook from a way to keep in touch with friends into a sophisticated behavior modification system that shapes political opinions, consumer behavior, and even mental health, particularly among teenagers. If Zuckerberg had announced in 2004 that he was building a global surveillance and manipulation apparatus that would profit by exploiting human psychological vulnerabilities, nobody would have signed up. But by implementing it gradually, by making each step seem like a reasonable evolution of the platform, Facebook became exactly that without most users noticing the transformation. This is Law 45 executed perfectly in the digital age. The revolution happens so gradually that it feels like evolution. By the time you realize you're living in a fundamentally different reality, you're already dependent on the new system. And now every tech company follows this playbook. Google started as a search engine. Now it knows more about you than your closest friends. Amazon started selling books online. Now it's restructuring global retail, logistics, and cloud computing. These aren't accidents. These are deliberate applications of Law 45. Preach innovation, deliver it gradually, and by the time people realize the scale of change, it's already irreversible. Here's a framework for understanding why societies resist rapid change. Social institutions function like an immune system. Your biological immune system exists to protect you from threats, primarily foreign pathogens. It works by distinguishing self from non-self, attacking anything it recognizes as foreign. This system evolved over millions of years and is remarkably effective. But here's the problem: the immune system is conservative by necessity. It treats anything unfamiliar as a potential threat. Sometimes this leads to autoimmune disorders, where the immune system attacks the body's own healthy cells because they've changed in some way. Sometimes it leads to organ rejection, where a transplanted organ that would save your life gets attacked because the immune system recognizes it as foreign. Societies have a similar immune system. It consists of cultural norms, institutions, traditions, laws, and social expectations. This system exists to protect the social organism from threats, primarily from ideas or behaviors that might destabilize the group. And like the biological immune system, the social immune system is conservative. It treats rapid change as a threat and mobilizes to reject it. This happens even when the change would be beneficial, even when the old ways are clearly failing, because the immune system doesn't evaluate change based on its merits. It evaluates change based on whether it's familiar or foreign. This is why reformers throughout history have faced such fierce resistance. They're not just fighting against people who benefit from the old system. They're fighting against the social immune system itself, which treats their reforms as pathogens to be eliminated. The Master of Law 45 understands this and doesn't trigger the immune response. They introduce change slowly enough that the social immune system doesn't recognize it as foreign. They make each small change feel like it's always been there, like it's a natural evolution rather than a revolution. Think about social changes that succeeded versus those that failed. Gay marriage went from unthinkable to legal in many countries within 2 decades. How? Not through sudden revolution, but through gradual cultural shift. First came increased visibility of gay people in media. Then civil unions as a compromise. Then marriage rights in a few jurisdictions. Then more and more jurisdictions. Each step prepared society for the next. By the time marriage equality became law, it felt inevitable rather than revolutionary because the cultural immune system had been gradually desensitized. Compare this to attempts to suddenly impose social change through law without cultural preparation. Prohibition in the United States tried to eliminate alcohol consumption through constitutional amendment. It was radical, comprehensive, and immediate. The social immune system rejected it violently, leading to organized crime, widespread lawbreaking, and eventual repeal. The lesson: even beneficial change must be introduced gradually or society's immune system will attack it. Let's understand the economics of power and change. Every leader, every institution, every system operates on a currency more valuable than money: legitimacy. Legitimacy is the widespread belief that your power is rightful, that you have the authority to make decisions and enforce them. Money can buy armies, but only legitimacy makes soldiers willing to die for you. Laws can compel behavior, but only legitimacy makes people obey when nobody's watching. Violence can force compliance, but only legitimacy creates willing cooperation. And here's the critical insight: legitimacy is finite and slow to accumulate but quick to spend. Think of it like political capital. You earn it gradually, through demonstrating competence, through being seen as serving the collective good, through respecting traditions and norms. But you can burn through it rapidly by acting in ways that seem illegitimate, by violating expectations, by changing too much too fast. When you implement gradual change, you spend your legitimacy slowly. Each small reform costs a little legitimacy, but if the reform proves beneficial or at least not catastrophic, you recover that legitimacy and potentially gain more. You're managing your legitimacy budget wisely, spending only what you can afford and earning returns on your investments. But when you implement radical change, you spend legitimacy massively and immediately. You're making a huge bet that the change will be so obviously beneficial that you'll quickly earn back all the legitimacy you spent. Sometimes this works. Usually it doesn't. This is why revolutions so often devour their leaders. Revolutionary leaders burn through legitimacy at an unsustainable rate. They disrupt everything, override all norms, break all traditions. Initially, they might have enormous legitimacy from being seen as heroes of change. But they spend it faster than they can possibly earn it back, and eventually they have nothing left. At that point, they can only rule through force, which requires constant escalation until something breaks. The master of Law 45 manages legitimacy like a wise investor. They spend it carefully, always ensuring they have reserves, always maintaining the perception that they're acting within acceptable bounds even as they gradually shift what those bounds are. Now let's get practical. If you're in a position where you need to implement change, whether in an organization, a community, or your own life, how do you apply Law 45? First, you must understand the existing system in depth. Not just how it officially works, but how it actually works. Every system has a formal structure and an informal structure. The formal structure is what's written in the rules and org charts. The informal structure is how things actually get done, who actually has influence, what unstated norms govern behavior. You cannot change a system you don't understand. Most failed reforms happen because the reformer only understood the formal system and ignored the informal one. They changed the rules but didn't change the underlying dynamics, so the old patterns simply reconstituted themselves in new forms. Second, identify what absolutely must change and what can stay the same. This is crucial. Many reformers fail because they want to change everything. They see the system as entirely corrupt or broken and want to tear it all down. But people need continuity. They need some things to remain familiar even as other things transform. So even when you're implementing something entirely new, frame it as returning to some idealized earlier state. When Augustus transformed Rome from republic to empire, he claimed he was restoring republican values. When corporations downsize, they call it returning to core competencies. When political movements push for radical change, they claim they're taking the country back to its founding principles. This isn't just manipulation, although it is that. It's also psychologically necessary. People need to feel that change is connected to something familiar, that it has roots in their history and identity, that it's not a leap into the abyss but a return to something they've lost. Fourth, implement change in stages, with pauses between each stage for consolidation. This is perhaps the most tactical element. You don't just move gradually, you move in discrete steps with breaks in between. Here's why. After each change, there's a period of disruption where people are learning new systems, where productivity drops, where resistance emerges. If you immediately implement the next change before people have adapted to the previous one, you create cumulative disruption that can spiral into chaos. Instead, implement a change, then pause. Let people adjust. Let the new way become the normal way. Let resistance exhaust itself or convert into acceptance. Only when the system is restabilized do you implement the next change. This requires patience, which is why it's so difficult. You know where you want to go. You have the vision of the transformed system. But you must resist the temptation to rush, because rushing destroys everything. Fifth, create small wins that demonstrate the value of change. This is crucial for maintaining momentum and legitimacy. Each small change should produce a visible benefit, something people can point to and say, yes, this improvement happened because we changed. These wins build support for the next change. They prove that transformation isn't just disruption for its own sake but actually produces value. They convert skeptics into supporters and silence critics who claim change would be catastrophic. And sixth, always maintain the form even as you change the substance. This is the deepest level of mastery. Keep the names of institutions, the ceremonies, the symbols, the familiar external structures. Let people feel like they're still living in the same system even as you fundamentally alter how that system operates. Augustus kept the Senate while making it powerless. Modern tech companies keep the language of user empowerment while building systems of control. Successful leaders keep the forms of democracy while concentrating power. This isn't just cynicism. It's understanding that humans need symbolic continuity even as they experience material change. Now we must confront the ethical dimension of Law 45, because everything I've described can be used for good or evil. On one hand, this law can be the tool of enlightened leadership. A wise leader who understands that beneficial change must be implemented gradually, who has the patience to transform systems over years rather than demanding instant revolution, who respects that people need time to adapt even to improvements, is using Law 45 in service of genuine progress. On the other hand, this law can be the tool of manipulation and tyranny. An authoritarian who uses the rhetoric of reform to consolidate power, who implements change so gradually that people don't notice their freedom disappearing, who maintains democratic forms while destroying democratic substance, is using Law 45 to enslave while appearing to liberate. The same principle serves both purposes. The same techniques apply equally to beneficial and malevolent ends. This is the uncomfortable truth about power: the tools themselves are morally neutral. Everything depends on the intention and character of the person wielding them. So what distinguishes the ethical application of Law 45 from the unethical one? I would argue it comes down to three questions. First, does the change actually serve the collective good, or does it primarily serve the power of the person implementing it? Second, is there transparency about the ultimate goals, or is deception fundamental to the strategy? Third, does the process preserve or expand people's ability to resist and reverse the changes if they prove harmful, or does it systematically eliminate that ability? A leader who implements gradual change that genuinely improves people's lives, who is honest about their vision even if they're strategic about implementation, and who maintains democratic accountability and reversibility, is using Law 45 ethically. A leader who implements gradual change that primarily consolidates their own power, who deceives people about their ultimate goals, and who systematically eliminates the ability to resist or reverse course, is using Law 45 as a tool of oppression. But here's the challenge: these categories aren't always clear. Most leaders genuinely believe their power serves the collective good. Most believe they're being appropriately transparent while keeping some strategies confidential. Most believe they're maintaining accountability while actually concentrating control. Self-deception is perhaps the greatest danger in applying Law 45. It's easy to convince yourself that you're serving others when you're actually serving yourself. It's easy to justify eliminating opposition as removing obstacles to progress. It's easy to believe you're the enlightened leader society needs rather than the tyrant it should fear. This is why external checks on power remain essential. This is why transparency, even when inconvenient, matters. This is why the ability to resist, to reverse course, to say no, must be preserved even when it slows down change you believe is necessary. The moment you start thinking that the ends justify the means, that you need to eliminate resistance for the greater good, that people can't be trusted to make the right choices so you must make them for them, you've crossed the line from using Law 45 ethically to using it tyrannically. Let's bring this down to the individual level, because Law 45 doesn't just apply to leaders of organizations and nations. It applies to anyone trying to change themselves or their circumstances. Think about personal transformation. People constantly attempt radical self-improvement. I'm going to completely change my diet, start exercising every day, learn a new language, build a business, transform my personality. They attack their lives with revolutionary fervor, determined to become a completely different person. And it almost never works. By February, the gym is empty again. The diet has been abandoned. The language app sits unopened. The business plan gathers dust. Why? Because they violated Law 45 on a personal level. They tried to change everything at once. They declared war on their existing habits, routines, and identity. In their personal immune system, the deep neural patterns built over decades, rejected the changes violently. Your brain literally experiences rapid self-imposed change as a threat. The anterior cingulate cortex activates. Stress hormones flood your system. Willpower, which is a finite resource, gets depleted rapidly. And eventually, usually within weeks, the old patterns reassert themselves because they're deeply grooved into your neural architecture while the new patterns are just surface scratches. Instead of revolutionizing your diet overnight, you change one meal. Just breakfast. For a month. You let that become normal, automatic, part of your identity. Then you change lunch. Then dinner. Over 6 months, you've completely transformed your diet, but you did it so gradually that it never felt overwhelming. Instead of trying to exercise for an hour every day starting immediately, you commit to 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. So easy it's almost laughable. But you do it every single day without exception until it becomes part of who you are, part of your routine that would feel strange to skip. Then you gradually increase the duration over months. This approach works with your brain's architecture rather than against it. You're not triggering the threat response. You're allowing new neural pathways to form gradually, to become as automatic as the old ones. You're managing your personal legitimacy, spending it slowly enough that you can earn it back through small wins. The same principle applies to changing relationships, careers, any aspect of your life. Sudden dramatic change almost always fails or creates new problems as bad as the old ones. Gradual, patient, persistent change succeeds even though it feels frustratingly slow while you're doing it. This is why Law 45 is ultimately a law about working with reality rather than against it, whether that reality is social systems or your own psychology. Let's peer into what Law 45 means for the future, because we're living through a period of accelerating change, and this principle has never been more relevant. Technology is advancing exponentially. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, nanotechnology, quantum computing, all of these fields are developing at rates that compound on themselves. The next 50 years will likely see more change than the previous 500. But human psychology isn't advancing exponentially. Our brains are essentially the same as they were 50,000 years ago. Our need for the familiar, our resistance to rapid change, our dependence on stable mental models, none of this has changed. This creates a dangerous mismatch. The technology can change faster than we can psychologically adapt to it. We're approaching a point where the rate of change itself becomes traumatic, where people can't integrate new realities fast enough before the next wave of disruption arrives. This is already creating social and political instability. People feel disoriented, left behind, unable to understand the world they're living in. This creates anxiety, which creates reactionary movements that promise to return to a simpler past. We're seeing this play out globally, technological acceleration creating psychological whiplash, creating political extremism. The masters of power in the coming decades will be those who can manage this tension. They'll need to harness technological change while preventing social breakdown. They'll need to implement the future gradually enough that people can adapt, even though the technology itself is racing ahead. This might mean deliberately slowing down the implementation of certain technologies, not because they don't work but because society isn't ready for them. It might mean creating extensive transition periods where old and new systems coexist. It might mean investing heavily in helping people psychologically adapt to change, not just in creating the change itself. Or it might mean that those who master Law 45 will control the future absolutely. They'll be the ones who can implement radical technological change so gradually, with such careful management of how it's perceived and experienced, that they fundamentally alter human civilization while most people feel like not much is changing. This is perhaps the most profound implication. In an age of accelerating technological change, the ability to implement that change gradually becomes the ultimate power. Those who master this will shape the future of our species. Those who don't will be swept aside by forces they can't control or comprehend. Here is where we must leave the comfortable realm of analysis and enter the uncomfortable realm of decision. You now understand Law 45. You see how it operates in history, politics, business, technology, psychology. You recognize it in the world around you. You can't unsee it now. Every reform, every transformation, every promise of change, you'll analyze through this lens. But what will you do with this knowledge? Will you use it to become a more effective agent of change, someone who has the patience and wisdom to transform systems gradually, building lasting improvement rather than creating cycles of revolution and reaction? Or will you use it to manipulate, to consolidate power while appearing to distribute it, to restrict freedom while claiming to expand it? Or will you use this knowledge defensively, to recognize when others are using these techniques on you, To maintain your awareness and autonomy even as powerful forces try to gradually shift your reality? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're the most important questions anyone who understands power must answer. Because Law 45, like all the laws of power, is descriptive rather than prescriptive. It describes how power actually works, not how it should work. It reveals the mechanism, but it doesn't determine the purpose to which that mechanism is put. You are now facing a choice that everyone who truly understands power must face. What kind of person will you become? Someone who uses power to serve yourself or to serve others? Someone who manipulates or someone who enlightens? Someone who concentrates power or someone who distributes it? The techniques are the same regardless of your choice. The difference is in your character, your values, your ultimate purpose. And here's the final twist, the ultimate application of Law 45 to itself. Even this choice doesn't have to be made all at once. You don't have to become a saint or a tyrant overnight. You can gradually shape yourself into the person you want to be, making small choices day by day, slowly building the character and habits that align with your deepest values. Change yourself gradually. Change your world gradually. But do change. Because stagnation is death, even if revolution is often worse. The art is in finding the middle path, the patient transformation that respects both the necessity of change and the human need for continuity. This is the wisdom at the heart of Law 45. So I leave you with this final question: what will you change, and how gradually will you change it? The future is waiting for your answer.